What's good, everybody? It's Lucid here, back for another video, and today we're going to be breaking down the Insect Glaive in Monster Hunter World. The Insect Glaive is the most acrobatic class in the game, and you're going to be doing a lot of jumping and spinning and mounting monsters. So let's get into the basics of the Insect Glaive. The Insect Glaive's basic ground combos are, as said, basic. They're just very simple triangle circle combos, nothing really to get into. But one of the shining points of the Insect Glaive is the actual use of the insect. Now, this insect is called a kinsect. It is important to note that these kinsects are equipable separately from the Insect Glaive itself. So you can have different types of kinsects that have different types of abilities as opposed to just the Insect Glaive itself. Of course, there are abilities that can match up with the Insect Glaive and give you bonuses, much like other RPGs. So pay close attention to the stats that your kinsects and Insect Glaives have, just in case that they can come together. Now, to get back to the really shining point of it, the kinsect itself. By holding out L2, you can shoot a projectile, or you can press triangle to send your kinsect to a designated location on a monster. Depending on what location that the projectile was sent to, or the kinsect itself was sent to, it will glow a certain color. Press circle to recall this kinsect back to you, and depending on the color, that's going to be the buff that you get. There's three buffs. There's a white buff, which is movement speed. There's an orange one, which is durability, more like a poise. It's not really defense, but more of knockback resistance. And then there is red, which is attack power. There's a fourth one, which is green, but that is all it's just a health boost. It's not really a buff, so I wouldn't classify it as a buff. Depending on what part of the monster you hit depends on what buff you get. So usually, I'm going to say usually because some monsters have different hitboxes, but usually the head will grant you a red buff, the body will grant you an orange buff, and the legs or arms will grant you a white buff, while the tail will give you health. This is very important for the Insect Glaive because the Insect Glaive itself does not have a very high attack power. So being able to buff yourself up with these buffs is very crucial to mastering this class, because you want to make sure you're getting the highest damage output. And to go back on a previous note that I made about the projectile that you shoot out from the kinsect, this is completely unique to whatever kinsect that you get. So what I mean by this is that once you shoot your projectile, it's going to make a small little dust barrier around it, where you or any of your party members can hit it to activate the effect. Different kinsects have different dust effects. For example, some kinsects have a healing dust essence that comes out. Others can enact elemental damage or poison damage, etc. So pay close attention to the stuff that your kinsect has, because they can be really unique to your playstyle. Another thing to note is that if you have all three of the buffs active at the same time, you get a slight bonus to all of the buffs. So, for example, if you're getting double attack damage, but you have all three of the buffs, you'll be getting like times 2.3, 2.4, something like that. There's also a small meter underneath it that is letting you know the time limit as to how long you have the buffs, and you can easily redo those by getting another buff. The other shining point of the Insect Glaive is, of course, its maneuverability. By pressing R2 and X, you can launch yourself up into the air. By pressing X an additional time, you can do an air dash, and that can also be accompanied by a second air dash that is brought along with a slash by pressing circle after X. It is important to note that if you have an attack buff or a movement speed buff, don't quote me on the movement speed buff, but I know for a fact the attack buff, if you do your circle attack in the air after doing the R2 and X air dash or whatever, he would do a flurry of attacks rather than just a singular slash. Another note to put on with this circle attack once you're in the air is that it can be chained, which means that if you actually manage to hit a monster with this attack, he will launch himself back up into the air, and you can keep chaining this until your stamina bar runs out. So almost indefinitely, depending on whether or not you have a stamina build. This is really important to doing damage above enemies and, hitting enemies where they least expect it. But where this class really shines is its ability to mount monsters. This R2 and X ability that launches you up in the air really sets this class apart from the other classes when it comes to being able to mount monsters. Arguably the best class when it comes to mounting monsters, as opposed to maybe the sword and shield, which can launch you up in the air, but I think this one is better. But yeah, it's a really cool class. It's really tricky to get into, but once you master all those tiny aspects of it, it can be a really fun class to play. Now for the negative side of this. First thing, I would not recommend this class for beginners. It is a very technically sound class, not something that you can really just go and hack and slash with. And it requires a bit of practice in the training area, so I definitely wouldn't recommend this for beginners. The second thing is that this class is kind of glitchy. There's been several times where your Kensec will get stuck on plants, it will get stuck on the ground, it will get stuck on different body parts of the monster and not go where you want it to. So yeah, it's pretty glitchy, so I wouldn't, like, if you're expecting a completely sound class, you might want to wait a week or two until they fix the bugs out, no pun intended, because it's kind of glitchy. And the last thing I would say is that, again, I wouldn't recommend this for beginners, and I also wouldn't recommend this class for solo players. The reason for that is because this class does have a fairly low attack power and relies almost solely on mounting monsters to do that critical damage. So I would definitely recommend this. This is probably one of my top picks if you have a complete 4-player team, but going in solo, I would definitely not recommend this class. But that's really a wrap for the overview of this class. If you have any additional questions, feel free to ask me in the comments. Stay tuned for more weapon breakdowns and more content on Monster Hunter World later this week. Peace.